Amidst the ebb and flow of coastal ecosystems, we find the resilience of nature and promise of restoration. And it is important to safeguard our shores and nurture our precious ecosystems for generations to come. Mangroves are the cornerstone of coastal resilience, silently protecting our shores and nurturing biodiversity, all while standing as a testament to nature's remarkable adaptability. Today's fireside chat will center around the crucial role of mangroves in enhancing countries' resilience and advancing their mitigation efforts through the remarkable carbon sequestration potential of these ecosystems. The topic of the day is Sustainable Coastal Resilience and Ecosystem Restoration, with a specific focus on the exemplary case of UAE's mangrove restoration. The discussion will shed light on the critical importance of coastal ecosystems in bolstering resilience and mitigating the impacts of climate change. We will spotlight the innovative strategies and successful initiatives employed in the UAE's mangrove restoration efforts, offering valuable insights and lessons for sustainable coastal management worldwide. Definitely, we'll go through the Mangrove Breakthrough Initiative championed by the Global Mangrove Alliance and the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions, which aims to restore and protect 15 million hectares of mangroves globally by 2030. I am Raji Unikrishnan, a journalist by profession and passion, and joining me today on the chat is a visionary leader with over 17 years of expertise in IT, geospatial, and natural environment restoration services, who comes with a unique blend of technical prowess and business acumen, driving transformative initiatives for sustainable natural environmental restoration at scale. George Ibrahim, General Manager at Dendra Systems in the Middle East region. Welcome, George. Well, to talk about Dendra, it is specialized in natural and biodiverse ecosystem restoration, leveraging ecology best practices, artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities, alongside geospatial and remote sensing technologies, and integrated with state-of-the-art drone technology to drive sustainable, natural, and biodiverse ecosystem restoration initiatives at scale. Well, George's biodata is pretty long, pretty extensive, and as we had a chat briefly before this conversation, I think this is your 16th chat at the COP28. That talks about your popularity as a speaker as well. So let's go into the topic, George. I would begin with mangroves. Such a beautiful piece of nature's magic, isn't it? And let's hear from you to begin with. How do you put in this map mangroves and their role in natural resilience? Let's begin with that.
Thank you, Raji. So first of all, talking about mangroves, they play a pivotal and critical role in the environment. So first of all, as you said, about carbon sequestration. And we know that mangroves has a capability of sequestering 4 times more than of carbon in their soil, more than and biomass more than terrestrial trees. So that's a huge amount of mangrove that can be sequestered in soil. Now, at the same time, mangroves play a very critical role in the biodiversity and the coastal resilience. So they play a pivotal role in providing shelter for fish nurseries as well, and for birds that come to nest in these ecosystems. Now, from another perspective, mangroves are very critical in protecting the shoreline from the climate change, specifically when we talk about storms, hurricanes, and storm surges. And also they have a pivotal role in playing against coastal erosion or coastline erosion. So all these factors are very important, and why we're seeing now more and more care and more interest in preserving and restoring such ecosystems. Now, mangroves also have other side that they can play, like the social impact. So they provide for different communities that live along the shoreline ways to benefit from their wood, ways to benefit from fishing in these specific areas. So they have also their own community-related impacts as well. In the UAE, as you have mentioned, there are different initiatives currently. I believe everyone heard about the COP26 announcement about 100 million mangroves that is going to be restored in the UAE by 2030. We'll speak a little bit about that later on, and we'll speak about what sort of role we are playing in that regard. So this is in brief about the impact and the importance of mangroves on the ecosystem and what they can offer in this.
Thank you for explaining that. My next question will actually be based on that inputs. With so much to offer, the mangroves, why are countries not working on it? Of course, I know UAE, and for that matter, the country that I come from, Bahrain, we do have plans in place, but mangroves are something very crucial, which can be nurtured, which can be put in the plans of countries, isn't it? Then what do you think is inhibiting countries from adapting such plans?
Well, there are various factors. Few of them are lack of awareness about the importance of that ecosystem and what sort of economic offerings as well that it can provide. Now, usually mangroves, they take prime land on the coastal, and that a little bit contradicts with possible urban developments where these lands are taken for urban development, they are taken to build aquaculture, and they are taken to build various farming and so on on these lands. Now, also part of it is a conflict of the land interest. So in many cases we see that a huge portion of lands are being reclaimed and taken for urban development and projects, looking at more on the short-term value of these lands rather than the long-term value of these lands. Another factor of it is certainly the financial aspect and the financial requirements to restore such ecosystems. And we know that mangrove restoration is quite expensive, so to speak. However, now we're seeing more and more with the technologies that are being offered that can reduce that cost a lot. So instead of going through a manual effort and labor and restoring such ecosystems and planting them with all the different also litter that these sort of approaches can leave from plastic waste and so on for the pods, etc. Now we're going into more drone and aerial seeding activities that can really scale up that restoration effort and reducing the carbon footprint on such work as well. For sure, awareness is required to support these different countries and understanding the better value and the long-term value of these ecosystems. And also there is sometimes the lack of proper regulations around such ecosystems, around protecting them and around restoring them. One of the factors, for example, that we're seeing around the world, and this is something we're trying to leverage also here in the UAE, and the different environmental agencies are already taking action in that regard, is by requesting any organization or entity or any company that is doing a coastal activity and may impact any mangrove ecosystems, they have to balance that with an equivalent of mangrove restoration somewhere within the same country. Now that sometimes equates to 2x, 3x, 5x of whatever being removed. It has to be restored. It depends on a case-by-case basis, but at least we're starting to see these sort of regulations that are being formed, which in other places around the world they lack, so to speak.
You mentioned about the awareness, the land part, and the regulations, and the expense part. But I think we should start with the awareness part, right? Because the rest would follow. And especially with the technological advancements, I'm sure expenses also can be tackled in a way or the other, but because these are too precious to be ignored, isn't it? Let's move into discussing the international initiatives like the alliance, which I mentioned about, and the UN champion efforts with the ambitious goal of planting this many. Can you tell us from your expertise on these projects, and what role do you think countries like the UAE can do to engage with such alliances?
Okay, so for the mangrove breakthrough, we know that they secured around or unlocked around $4 billion by 2030 for mangrove ecosystem restoration or protection. Now, at the same time, that initiative has a target of conserving or securing 15 million hectares of mangrove ecosystems by 2030, right? Now, there are almost 41% currently of the mangrove ecosystems that are in protected areas, and also that initiative targets to extend that from 40% to 80% to protect these ecosystems worldwide. Now, this initiative, with the amount of funding that is being accounted for, it can equate to almost restoring 50,000 hectares of mangrove ecosystems per year, okay, around the globe. Now, the UAE, alongside different countries, they can play different roles in providing the support for these projects or even funding them. And also, now we're seeing more economic aspect of mangrove restoration when we start speaking about blue carbon as well and carbon credit. That's because of the amount of carbon such ecosystems are able to sequestrate in their soil. So this is also a push for various organizations possibly to start funding such projects, because it will have a certain ROI at one point in time as well. Now, unfortunately, in that regard, we're seeing that the most effort is coming from governments and very few effort or very few funding coming from private companies. And we hope with the blue carbon initiatives and carbon credits that will push it a little bit up, and that private companies will start contributing more and more, because that may lead to a huge and amazing outcome if we see that private companies are starting to have an impact as well in that regard, and not leave it only to the government to take such actions. Possibly this can also influence the companies' policies and the companies' net zero targets as well, not only from reducing the carbon footprint but from renewable energy and so on, but also by restoring these ecosystems as well.
Interesting. As from the global scenario, that was a perfect picture. And as you said, countries like the UAE, we've been hearing in every topic of discussion throughout. We are on day 9, day 10 of COP. There is this bridge that needs to be built between the public and the private sector. And it's good to see that it's getting better, because it's everybody's cause. It's not limited to the private or the public. It's a common cause for the planet, isn't it? Coming specifically to UAE and UAE's initiatives of restoring mangroves, I'm sure you're the right person to take us through in detail.
Well, for the UAE, there is a big effort that is going on in protecting these ecosystems and restoring them at the same time. Now, looking at the 100 million mangrove initiative that was set to be restored by 2030, Dendra systems specifically, we are contributing to almost 1/3 of that amount. So we're talking about 27 million mangroves in 5 years. This is the scale that we can operate with, and possibly more as well. So that leaves another 3 years for us to be able to drive bigger impact and better impact till 2030. Now, the awareness that is taking place, and thank you for this specific statement about the partnership between the private and public sector, because this is a word that is, I always say in any discussion that I have, whether with government agencies or with different organizations, that such partnership is important and critical if we want to drive change and if we want to be successful. Private entities can drive the innovation, the different sort of technologies that can come from their startups, or whether from the different projects around the globe that they can undertake, while government agency also can support with a regulatory body, as a regulatory body, to drive these sort of activities. So this partnership is really critical and crucial. Also, the UAE is playing a big role in the awareness. So we're seeing more and more awareness for schools, for universities, for the communities to go and engage in such ecosystems, whether to better understand them or whether to better understand how to preserve them as well. Because we see that in many instances, not only restoration by itself is not sufficient, but also protecting and conserving these ecosystems plays an equal role. That means that we need to drive away a little bit or clean these coastal ecosystems from plastics, from trash, from all of these different values or different aspects. And community can play a major role in that. Now, how we can drive the community? We drive it also with a data-driven approach. And now I'll shift this discussion more about the effort and the technology that is being used in the UAE in restoring these ecosystems. So, as you have mentioned, Dendra is working in implementing best practices in ecology. So we merge the science and the technology together. Best practices in ecology, best practices in remote sensing GIS, and high-resolution satellite images, and engineering and innovation, and as well in drone-based seeding implementations. That means, in order to achieve our target, we took a path of creating or developing an innovative approach. We call it Restoration Operating System or Restoration OS. This Restoration OS, it drives through a baseline analysis where we need to first understand what we currently have. So what is our baseline? What is this ecosystem about? What are the different contributors to this ecosystem? What is the pressure on this ecosystem? What is the current take stock on this ecosystem? And then we go into selecting the best areas that are most suitable or have the higher chances of success. Because we see in different organizations and some companies, unfortunately, just go and spread seeds in specific areas to restore them. But that by itself, and we call it spray and pray. This is the terminology we came up with internally. So that means that they go do such activities without really understanding the success rates of those ecosystems and whether these ecosystems support such amount of seeds that are being spread or restored in these areas. Because sometimes overpopulating certain areas also can have a dramatic impact and a negative impact on these ecosystems and population. So what we do at Dendra as well, we take this approach and then we go into high resolution data capturing and high resolution data and imagery, and we analyze it using artificial intelligence and machine learning models to go and take so we call it like the layers of cake. So we take all these layers that we capture and we analyze, and we take the best decision about where are the best areas that are potentially pro for seeding and where we can seed them. Then there is another process, not enough to stop there. We have to do post-monitoring, and then after post-monitoring there is possibly the interventions that can be made around that ecosystem to preserve it and support it. Now, in the UAE, we are also breaking records from a technology point of view and what we are able to implement. In the UAE this year, in one day, we were able to spread 100,000 viable seeds. So 100,000 mangrove trees per day. That's a huge amount. Another record breaking, it wasn't done by us, but it was in Pakistan, but that included almost 1,000 individuals doing mangrove planting by hand. So imagine we were able to reach 100,000 trees of mangroves per day with 8 people and 4 drones. And that is scalable. So we can scale it the way we want to scale it with. Now, from a different point of view, UAE also has certain targets to do restoration activities in different places around the world and support those ecosystems as well, because eventually there is a certain limit about the shoreline capacity. How much can you plant on the shoreline, correct? And if we want to keep driving impact on a global scale, then we have also to migrate possibly to other areas and do such activities and restorations in other areas. And this is something also we're seeing the UAE has interest in developing further and further. And when we speak about the UAE, for sure we speak about all the Emirates. Abu Dhabi are playing a major role in storing and restoring and conserving the mangrove ecosystem, alongside Dubai certainly and the Northern Emirates as well. Now, one more point I forgot to mention it earlier is that mangroves also has impact on other habitats. So mangroves, with their way of like cleaning the water, the polluted water and sediments and sequestering them, also they provide they have a positive impact on coral reefs, and also they have a positive impact on salt marshes and seagrass mats. So this is something also important about the direct and indirect impact of these ecosystems. And this is where we see that the UAE and our initiative with the government here is driving this change at this scale. Now, why we use AI? Because for any impactful activity, manual efforts are no longer viable. Now, we see around the globe, we have almost, especially with the latest stock take on carbon and on the temperatures, we see that we are a little bit off track on the 1.5 degrees, and we're driving towards more 2.4 to 2.6 degrees Celsius increase, which is catastrophic, to be honest. But at the same time, looking at our situation, we see that we have 2 billion hectares of land that are degraded and that can be restored. If those lands are restored and preserved, they will help us to go back on track on the 1.5 degrees that is currently being aimed for. How can we do that? We need the technology, we need the scale. Manual efforts will not be sufficient, unfortunately, to do so. And this is where our data-driven approach is very crucial and important, to leverage the data, the technology, and the science to drive such restorations at scale.
That was a very comprehensive explanation of the UAE initiatives, and I liked the point that you mentioned about spray and pray. We definitely do have to take stock of things before venturing into initiatives like this. And coming back to mangrove planting again in the region, UAE has been a leader in many of the initiatives, and they've been taking a lead in the region. How do you look at the rest of the region, especially the GCC nations? What do you think are the best practices that countries like Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar or Saudi Arabia for that matter, adopt from UAE? What do you think?
The first thing, my opinion, should be the regulatory body around regulating any work that is going to happen around the coastline where mangrove ecosystems reside. If that is not present, and we know that this is being developed in different countries, and different countries, especially in Oman and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, also there are a huge effort in restoring these ecosystems, especially whether in the Red Sea side of Saudi Arabia, or whether in Oman and Bahrain and in Qatar. So first of all, the regulatory body. Regulations has to be really strict and has to be comprehensive to protect these ecosystems, and that's the first and foremost important thing. The second important thing, which is of also equivalent importance, is leveraging scientific approaches and the technology alongside it to do such restoration work. Because haphazard kind of restoration efforts may have a negative impact and a dramatic impact on the existing healthy populations and healthy ecosystems. So this is why we are trying also with the different agencies in the UAE to support them with establishing the Center of Excellence in Mangrove Restoration and Coastal Restoration efforts. And this Center of Excellence, its aim is to develop the best practices in restoration work, whether for coastal or inland, but starting the focus on the coastal restoration or coastal ecosystems, and then drive the Center of Excellence and the outcome of the Center of Excellence, and develop it and grow it in the region as well, whether in Saudi Arabia or different countries in the GCC area. So this is very important. We're also trying to play a major role in supporting the Center of Excellence that's being established in the UAE. And we're driving the technology part of it as well, alongside the ecology part of it, to support future expansion of such regulatory, let's say, approach and scientific approach to be used elsewhere in the world, not only in the GCC, but also on a global level.
Now let's move into the challenges. What are the major challenges that you see in a world that is very soon being driven by technological advancements, and every COP we see, we're realigning, isn't it, with the developments, with the way forward and things like that. When it comes to the topic of mangroves, what are the major challenges that you would spot with UAE under spotlight to begin with?
Well, some of the challenges that we're seeing is the permitting process of doing this work. Sometimes the permitting process take a little bit more time because we're still developing the concept around it. I'll give you a small example. We used at Dendra, we have the largest industrial drones ever used in the UAE for restoring mangrove ecosystems. That's what we were speaking about scale just a few minutes earlier. Those drones, to be able to permit them, those were the first drones used in the UAE for such type of work. So it took us quite a hefty amount of time to develop the safety measures and procedures around these drones to convince and provide the needed information for the different authorities to provide access or to provide permits to do such work. And thankfully, they were very supportive when they knew the mission about what we're trying to achieve, and they were provided with all the required assurances from safety and operations point of view, which we're also very well known of at Dendra. That's part of the challenges that we face sometimes from time to time. Other challenges is the logistics approach of restoration. But what we can do in that aspect is we drive a little bit the drone technology to its capacity by reaching to areas that are very hard to reach by foot or by people usually. So unhospitable areas or far further areas that may cause risk to humans as well. And we use different sort of logistics and transportations and boats and so on just to arrive to the areas where we need to operate with, and then we drive the drones from there. Funding is currently getting better in this aspect, and more awareness and more demand or eagerness from different bodies to restore these ecosystems. So the challenges, so to speak, are getting less and less, especially in the UAE. But still there is lots of work to be done also in neighboring countries and pushing this agenda further.
That's positive to hear that challenges are getting narrower because it's better. This COP28, you told me you've been on 15 platforms. I'm sure you were speaking of mangroves and related subjects, isn't it? How do you think the topic is gaining momentum, and what is the importance? Especially today, we have the theme of nature, land use and oceans as a theme for the COP today. How do you think the subject of mangroves as such has a prominence in the COP agenda?
Well, the importance of this ecosystem is being now more and more knowledgeable for people. So people are being more knowledgeable about the importance of this ecosystem. And we're seeing more interest in restoring or taking effort and funding these different projects. Now, the good thing about also this COP is that it opened the door for restoration and funding restoration work, not only in the specific country where the different organizations work with, but also they look at where are the best areas worldwide that we can also restore and benefit from. That can be driven also by possible financial interest, okay, like the blue carbon, and we saw the different initiatives about the blue carbon credits and so on. But certainly the momentum is getting higher and higher. And the targets for different countries to restore and to achieve a certain number of mangroves is getting higher. Now, I believe the main drive for that is the current, we're currently off track with our targets, and the actions, I believe this COP is driving more action rather than just signing MOUs and agreements and just really not implementing much of them. So this COP, I believe, is also driving action, and this is one of the key themes of this COP, which I like. So where we are united, we can really, if we take the decision together, we can also drive action. And UAE is well known for the action it takes on all these different areas.
And yes, one of the very interesting taglines of the COP, unite, act, unite, act and deliver. Very true that. Have you taken a ride through the mangroves anytime? Have you gone through it? I'm sure you've done, right? I have done that. So I know how beautiful mangroves are and how thriving they are, because the country that I am residing in, Bahrain, has a beautiful shoreline of mangroves, and it's indeed the beauty of the nature restored in all its glory, isn't it? So before we conclude this chat, I would want to hear from you, like, what is that one message that you want to give to the listeners out there and the larger world about, to both, to who knows about mangroves and the others? What is that one thing that you would emotionally put across? Because at times we need to really connect with nature. I was having a discussion in the morning with a friend of mine. You really need to connect beyond all these talks and the agreements or what we read. We really need to connect. So if you are to connect with these lovely creations of nature, what is that one thing that you would want to speak?
If you allow me, I would like to raise two key points. The first is that we really have to pick up on our sustainable practices. Our ancestors were more sustainable than us, and they did that by habit, right? They took exactly what they needed and left the remaining for nature, for it to repopulate and reused by others as well. So that's the first thing I want to really emphasize on, is picking up again on our sustainable habits and making them becoming a habit rather than just forced towards us to be implemented. The second thing is reconnecting. We were just having a small COP activity, and one of the key things we came up with is we need to reconnect the young or the children with nature, because reconnecting children with nature is, if I ask you, for example, what would be your best retreat if you want to get away from the city, go get some rest, stress-free, so on, many people will say, I would like to go to somewhere in nature and get away from the traffic, get away from the city and so on, and get some peaceful moment in nature. If that's our retreat, and that's where we find security and comfort from our day-to-day lives, so how do you think is it important to restore or to conserve that ecosystem and environment? About mangroves especially, well, they are beautiful on the shoreline. They have, we're engaging with communities and awareness within the mangrove ecosystem to drive such, for them to understand the impact of that. I would also recommend or suggest for people, whenever they see plastics and trash laying around the shoreline, if they can pick them up and recycle it as well, that will be very helpful. This personal impact or personal action by people can make a difference. And also, when I said reconnecting children with nature, that will drive the future habits of these nature to become like a norm, like its own habit, not something they are learning about or they want to being taught about. It becomes something part of their internal practices or day-to-day practices, which can drive the future also towards their children and the different communities that they can engage with.
Beautifully said, George. One is habit, definitely. for those who are not in the habit, we have to make it a habit, and habits come a little hard, isn't it? And the best thing is educating the future. We had a woman named Farah Naz here yesterday. She said she was launching a second book at the COP, and that's all about a children's story. And I asked her, like, why that? That is catching them young. So it is our responsibility to nurture the habit in them. And yes, thank you very much for taking us through this beautiful topic, giving those insights about mangroves in UAE and the larger projects. Thank you so much. Your experience and expertise was very well expressed. Well, what I would want to conclude is, beyond this fireside chat, let us take this ember on, let it not die out, that towards sustainability we should all stay connected, committed. Thank you so much, for George. Thank you.